Greetings. This is the Cancer Interviews podcast, and I'm your host, Bruce Morton. You know, for some, it is a tragic, daunting part of the cancer journey when one appears to have survived cancer, only to find out that the cancer has returned. Our guest on this episode is going through that experience. She is Brenda Farris of Yuma, Arizona. Brenda survived breast cancer, but now she is battling it again. So here she is, Brenda Farris. And Brenda, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate that. I'm always happy to share my story because everybody's story inspired me, and I hope I can say something that helps somebody else along their journey.
And we feel very confident that you will be able to achieve just that for anybody watching and listening. Now, Brenda, we like to start out from the same place with all of our interviews, and that is to learn a little bit more about you, because you're not just a cancer survivor. You're a woman, you're a person with a life exclusive of cancer. So if you would, tell us a bit about where you're from, what you do for work, and what you do for fun when time allows for fun.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like having fun, so that's always nice. I was born in Idaho, but raised mostly in Eastern Oregon, a small town, Northeast Oregon, in Hermiston. My folks still live there after all these years, so it's fun to go back and visit and see the old little stomping grounds. After I got married, I lived in the western side of Oregon. And if you know anything about Oregon, the western side is like a rainforest, and the eastern side is like a desert. So it's totally disparate like that. And we moved to Arizona in 2005-ish. So we've lived here for a good many years, at this point, 16, 17, 18 years. And now I live in Yuma, Arizona. And my husband has a tax practice, so I help with accounting and with taxes. And I have a quilting business. So a little interesting and unusual, but I do long arm quilting for people that create quilts. So it's very fun. And so actually one of my passions that I do is my work because I enjoy it so much.
Before we get to your cancer journey, we want to get to a part of your life before your cancer journey. If you can recall back to the days prior to your diagnosis, what was your health like?
You know, that's a good question. And I thought that I was a pretty healthy person. I ate fairly well. We can talk about that in a minute, the changes that I made, but I felt like I ate pretty well. I didn't drink alcohol or smoke and didn't have a lot of big challenges in my life. I exercised on a pretty regular basis. So I felt like I was being pretty healthy. And so that'll probably lead into a little bit of the cancer journey as time goes on. And I had 3 boys, and we were pretty active in a lot of things. I homeschooled my kids. And so we were constantly participating in activities, and I tried to do things with them. When they took karate class, I tried to do that with them. They went skiing and learned skiing lessons. I went and did that with them. So overall, I felt like I was doing pretty well. Again, changes were made, and we can talk about that. But I think that I was doing a pretty good job of keeping track of my health along the way. And we did have some stressful things, and that might have led into it, some challenges with business and such, and family that always happens. But in the long run, I felt like I was being a pretty healthy person.
But as is the case with anyone who's a cancer survivor, there was a juncture in which things veered away from being normal. When did you notice that something might not be right?
You know, that's you're right. At some point, something changes a little bit. And what's interesting is, independent of each other, my husband and I were both researching about cancer. Nothing to do with anything that we knew about me. And I had just finished watching the Truth About Cancer series, and it's like a 9-part series, 1 hour per day, basically. And I had been watching this for the 9 days thinking, somebody in my life might need this. This is some good information here. So I was watching it, taking notes about this. And this was in like 2015 when it very first came out. And I really enjoyed the series a lot. Felt like I learned a lot. This is something I can probably benefit people with. Little did I know, the person that was going to need it was going to be me. My husband, independent of me, but at the same time, was also researching about cancer, mostly breast cancer, interestingly enough, because he was a fund manager and he was raising money for a breast surgeon in California to get some new equipment for his breast cancer clinic there. So my husband was learning about it, checking into it, just learning what kind of equipment was going to be needed and what he was going to be using in his clinic. So at that point, we both had some information about cancer. We drove over to Palm Springs, California to meet with this breast cancer surgeon, find out about his equipment, make sure it was viable before my husband was going to set up the fundraising activities for it. And he had a thermography machine. myself, being a woman and attending this activity, we figured I should test the equipment just to show people how it worked. And so I went into the room. You basically undress on the top of your body, and it's like an air conditioner that cools down your body a lot. And then whatever areas are warmer will show up in the thermogram after your body's been cooled down. It takes like 5 minutes. So I had used this. It's not painful. It just takes a few minutes to get it done. And I figured he's going to come in and say, okay, let's look at your image. Let's talk about what it's supposed to do. And now we can go off and do the fundraising. But when he came in, he had a very ashen look on his face. And he said, wow, you have breast cancer. So that was how we found out about it. We did not go there to find out that I had breast cancer. We went there so that we could research his equipment. So my point is, what we were doing was just researching on our own, independent of each other. It hadn't even collaborated that we were doing this. It just was kind of this very serendipitous activity that we were involved in. Then we went over and met with this breast cancer surgeon just to find out what equipment he has. And we find out I'm the one that has breast cancer. So we were shocked and surprised and learned a lot from him in that experience. So does that answer your question a little bit there?
Yes, it does. Now, before we go any farther, we want to remind you that we're confident you'll be able to learn some tips and tools to help you through your personal cancer journey. But first, we'd like to invite you to please give us a like, leave a comment or a review below, and share this story with your friends. Kindly click on the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so you'll be notified the next time we have a cancer interview. And if you or a loved one are facing a cancer diagnosis, please click on the link in the description and show notes below to check out our free guide, The Top 10 Things I Wish I Knew When I First Got Cancer. Now, Brenda, you had gotten this horrific news, and with that news, you needed to act on it. So what was next?
As you can imagine, it was a 6-hour drive for us to come home. And as you can imagine, that drive was going to be a long, hard drive. And there was actually a lot of silence in that drive. I think both of us just trying to mull over what was happening. And is it even real? He did do a ultrasound while I was there. So I had a thermography and an ultrasound, both of which confirmed to him the existence of the cancer. It was in the left breast. But he did say I would need to have a mammogram before anything could happen because for insurance and such to kick in, that needs to happen, which I totally understand. And so it actually took me a little while to get my head around the fact that I was going to need to go home and get a mammogram. I hadn't had one before. I was fairly young at the time. I was about 46 years old. And even with the American Cancer Society at the time, they were saying you could even wait to 50 to even have a mammogram. So to be honest, I'd never even had one before. It wasn't anything in my wheelhouse. And I would have waited a couple of more years to have a mammogram if this hadn't have occurred. It wouldn't even been something I'd thought about. So I did wait a little bit longer. I don't know that I would say denial. I think I was still trying to get some research under my belt to decide if this was actually the avenue I wanted to take. And then it was a couple more months, to be honest, before I went in to get that mammogram. And I went into the mammogram, and because we had gone to see this breast surgeon and spend all day with him and talk to him about what he looks for in breast cancer, when I saw they did the mammogram, and the tech actually showed the mammogram to me, which I think is highly unusual. But I kind of knew what I was seeing. Not that by any means I'm an expert at diagnosing breast cancer because of a mammogram, but something showed up that doctor had showed me in Palm Springs. So because of that, I kind of knew what I was seeing there, and it was highly confirmed to me that this was the case. And so that was kind of the next step. And it was a shock. I was surprised to see how large of an area it had splintered out. I had 2 good size masses, and we can talk about that, but it had splintered out quite a bit. And so to me, it was a big shock to see how large that it was right there in the mammogram.
You know, Brenda, each different type of cancer is different, and upon diagnosis, there are some types of cancer in which you only have one avenue you can take. Other types of cancer afford you various treatment options. At that point, did you feel like you had a treatment option, or was there only one way to go?
At that point, I realized I was going to have the cancer removed. And we did start looking around to decide where we were going to go. And there's several good places over in the Phoenix area, which is where I lived at the time. I now live in Yuma, but at the time I lived in Phoenix. And so I know there were several good locations, and I went and explored several of them to decide which one was going to be a good fit for me. But knowing how large the masses were, the option really was to have the cancer removed. Now, I have learned since then, and we can talk about that if we want to, I have learned since then that there are some ways to be able to reduce the cancer ahead of time. And maybe I would have researched into that a little bit more, but can you really second guess yourself? It's really hard. Once you've made the decision, right, and you've gone into it, do you really want to be second guessing it? And yeah, I did. I think a lot of people probably do. Did I make the right decision? But I think in the long run, having looked back at it and knowing that the avenue I've taken and the route that's happened over the last several years, I did make the right decision at the time. But I know there are different avenues to take, and I think just having the removal, what was the option there?
What was the toughest part of that treatment? Because there's a physical piece, a mental piece, and an emotional piece. What was the toughest part?
Of course, the physical recovery was challenging, but I would definitely have to say emotional was way more challenging to me. To realize that I felt like I had lost not only a part of my identity, but I was going to have to live with this for the rest of my life. Because I tell people, to do your research, because once you have surgery, you can never not have surgery again. Once you have part of your body removed or a surgery happening, you can't go back and not have that happen. And so to me, there was that strong challenge. There was that emotional regret. And I did several times second guess it. It was done. There was no option left. I'd already had the mastectomy. So it's not like I could go back and change that. But I did feel this kind of emotional regret. And oh, should I have done that? Do I wish that I would have tried other avenues first? And there was that second guessing along the way that I try to just keep down and tell myself you can't go that route. So in the long run, I think the emotional was the bigger challenge there.
And given that that emotional piece, it's really important for your emotional side to get sources of support for you during that very difficult time. Where did the support come from?
Absolutely. And I hoped we were going to lead into that, because that's true. The emotional, I think, was harder. And so how do you overcome that? Well, your support system. That is really important. And I think it makes all the difference no matter what you're going through. Find a support system that's going to help you and be on your side. And you just don't have room for all of that negative information in your head. You have to find something that's going to support you. And you might make a decision, you people might make a decision that's different than me, but you need that support in whatever you're going through. And so you have to find the people that are going to be that support. The big thing that I found, one, is I did daily activities that took care of my self-care. So if there wasn't somebody to support me right then, if I could get 5 or 6 of my like 8 self-care items, and I could do them like at least 6 days a week, that helped me to be on top of my game so that I could support myself, so that I could be in a place to see my day as most positive as possible. And then, of course, I enlisted my family. My husband, like I said, we were both researching independently cancer, him specifically breast cancer, so we knew quite a bit. Hence, he was a really great support system for me because it's something we had been researching at the time. And then, of course, my family. Not only my kids, but my folks were very supportive. My parents still live in Hermiston, Oregon, like I said, and I lived in Phoenix area. So my mom loves to do crafting and quilting and things, and she sent me a beautiful quilt, and it arrived literally on the day I got home from the hospital. Like we hadn't even planned that, but the day I got there, I just settled into my easy chair after my surgery. And of course, you know, convalescing is hard. And I literally just put that blanket on me and I just kind of wept, thinking not just so much about the sadness of the surgery, but more like the serendipitous, beautiful moment that this blanket of comfort showed up on the day that I needed it, that her quilt that she had created. And so the support system was strong there. And then my extended family, like my brother, I have a couple of siblings, and my brother Baron was a strong support there. there. And we can get into that a little bit. But that support made a huge difference, because there's times you need to reach out and you just need to say something. And I felt like I don't want my feelings to be discounted. I want to feel all the feels. If I'm frustrated right then and I'm sad about my decision, I want to be able to express that without somebody trying to calm it down too much. Oh, you'll feel better later. This is just happening. Lots of people have been through this. I just want to feel sad when I'm sad. And so I chose specifically people that would help me go through it in that experience.
Now, as for the physical part of it, was chemo part of your treatment?
Good question there. I had my breast tissue sent into the Oncotype lab where they checked it out for viability of chemotherapy. I have a very slow growing but very aggressive form of breast cancer. When I got back the results and I met with my oncologist, we each had some paper in front of us to show us what the results were. And it showed that within 5 years of recurrence of cancer or death within 5 years, which is kind of the marker they put with quite a few cancers, especially with breast cancer, with my type of cancer, if I had chemotherapy, my chance of recurrence within 5 years or death within 5 years was double than if I did not do chemotherapy. Double, because my type of cancer is very slow growing. Chemotherapy works best on fast growing cancers. Like if you think about it, people that have chemotherapy, the inside of their mouth gets very sore, their hair falls out, their fingertips are very tender. That's because the chemotherapy is working on fast growing cells, and all of those cells are fast growing. Well, my cancer is very slow growing, but aggressive. It's going to kill all of those just decent cells that are trying to help out my body, but the cancer is just going to sit there and kind of drink its lemonade and watch that chemotherapy go by. And later on, when that cancer tries to return, I don't have any good cells to combat it, and that cancer is just going to jump in there because it's aggressive. So I didn't have chemotherapy as an option because it was a slow-growing cancer that wasn't interested in chemotherapy. Yes, I could have done chemotherapy, and yes, my oncologist did comment and consider recommending it. But in the long run, again, knowing what the numbers were and knowing what we knew about chemotherapy because of our research, I did opt not to do chemotherapy. That wasn't an option for me. And my cancer was already in the lymph nodes. It had already broken open, and so it was traveling along the system with the lymph system in my body.
Brenda, in terms of your first cancer journey, can you recall when you began to turn the corner and things seemed to be going in a good, positive direction? And what was that like?
Good. I appreciate that. That's a good question, because cancer can feel like such a downer and a depression. So it's nice to think about something positive. And there was a point. In fact, it was almost like day and night. At the time, I didn't realize it, but pretty soon, once I had made the connection, I could look back and almost see, it was probably within like a week, that things flipped around. And it did take me a little while to get emotionally over the challenge, like I talked about before, about how emotional actually seemed like the bigger thing to overcome once I was done with the surgery. And yeah, recovery was hard physically, I get that, but once that was done, the emotional was still there that I had to live with. So I would say the emotional part lasted for a couple of good months, but within probably 10 weeks, so I'm going to say like 2.5 months, I was able to realize this is kind of the new me, and I have options at this point, and I can take my health into my own hands, and I can jump forward and make something out of this, not only for me, but for other people. And when that happened, I was able to realize I can be a catalyst for somebody else. I can take this information and help somebody, not just help me. And so I'm going to say it was about 2.5 months, and at that point, I could see a shining light. And it took a little bit longer before I saw this as being something positive, and we can get into that a little bit, but there was a moment that it was almost like a flip that got switched and said, there's something good that can come out of this.
This sounds great and positive, and again, I suspect that it has been inspirational for others, but then at some point down the line, things took a turn for the worse. If you would describe what happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, it had been 6 years since my original diagnosis. In fact, almost 6 years to the day, because it was in November. And I had, so it was a left side mastectomy. I had reconstructive surgery, and it was a couple of years into that, maybe 3 years into the time period after the reconstructive surgery, that I noticed a lump under my arm, kind of between the breast and the underarm, so kind of right in that area. Well, it was becoming a little bit more prominent, but I'm going to say this literally was there in my awareness for 2.5 to 3 years. And I totally thought, my husband totally thought, this is a piece of the reconstructive bag. I'll put that in there so that we know what I'm talking about. And it had just gotten flipped a little bit, and there was some scar tissue happening there. It didn't bother me. It wasn't really in my way. It wasn't hurting me. It had grown larger, but hey, if you've got scar tissue, wouldn't it make sense that over time the scar tissue would be getting bigger? This is my thinking. This is what I had in mind. And I just let it go. I didn't think much of it. We had moved from Phoenix over to Yuma, Arizona. I didn't have the same doctors, the same oncologist. And I figured if I go in with some little ache and pain and try to describe this to a new physician or an oncologist, they're going to roll their eyes and say, "Oh, Mrs. Farris, this is just a piece of the bag that's rolled over. This is some scar tissue. Surely you don't need to be worried about every little hangnail when it comes to cancer. Go home and relax your little self. Stop being so concerned." I really thought that was going to happen. I did not even give it a second thought. Hence, this had gone on for probably literally 3 years. And at this point, that bump, that lump was large enough. It was about as big as the end of my thumb. I mean, it was sticking right out of my body. There was no extra fat or tissue or anything there because that's where the mastectomy was. And so this was just a big red marker sticking out of my body. So I wouldn't say I was nervous to go get it checked out. I just thought, it's nothing. It's just a piece of my body that's turning into some scar tissue. So why continue to pursue it? Eventually, when I was at my primary doctor, I just said, "Could you look at that and just give me an idea?" Obviously, he doesn't really know anything about cancer, but he could let me know, "I've seen something kind of like that. Maybe you want to get it checked out." He sent me over to a plastic surgeon here in Yuma, Arizona, who also is an excellent breast surgeon and works on some other things. And it took us a little while to get into him. If you know anything about Arizona, especially Yuma, in the winter, there's a lot of winter visitors that come here to escape the weather they have and enjoy the beautiful weather we have. So it did take a little while to get into this doctor because there's just a lot of people here right now needing him. Or I mean, not right now, but at the time that I needed to go in, there were a lot of people because it was wintertime. And by the time I finally got there, he looked at what I was showing him. Again, I thought he's going to feel like, "Mrs. Farris, you this is scar tissue." I don't think he's literally going to say, "You're wasting my time," but I just felt like this is a very busy man. I'm probably not his most important patient. As soon as he saw that, he knew exactly what he was looking at, and he was ready to get it biopsied. And within a couple of days, I showed up there for a biopsy. So I was not in denial. I just didn't even know what I was looking at. I figured we are totally talking scar tissue here. And when I took it to the plastic surgeon, who turned out to be my breast surgeon, he was keenly aware and needed to get it dealt with right away.
So after hearing that news, what did you do?
And yeah, so we did have to jump on the bandwagon right away. And the concern, here's the issue, is that the cancer had returned in the exact same place, or the exact same area. And he said, "That's very unusual because there's no breast tissue left. I had a mastectomy." So he said it's very unusual that would happen. He had not seen that many times, but he knew what he was looking at, and it had grown attached to the capsule that had grown. My body had grown around the breast the implant. So it was like scar tissue. And I didn't know that it was even going to grow that. I didn't know that was the case. Maybe they had told me 6 years before that, but whether I hadn't taken notice of it or whether I just hadn't recalled it, I didn't know that a capsule was going to grow there. So it was literally growing on the capsule. But the big concern is, like I said, there's no extra fat there. There's no extra tissue there. There's no extra muscle there. It was growing right on top of my rib cage. The big concern is that it had already infiltrated into the bone, into the rib cage, into the lungs. That was the gigantic concern. That's where he was saying, we need to get this dealt with soon. So there were lots of tests to be had. There was MRIs. there was biopsy, there was CT scans, there was PET scans to determine where in 6 years this cancer had migrated out to. And if you think about it, in 6 years, cancer that's metastasized can go just about anywhere. I mean, it can go in the lungs, it could go in the spine, it could go into the brain, it could go into the liver. The amazing part is this cancer was only in that one known area that I told you about just now, and it was operable. It had not spread anywhere else to the rest of the body. And in 6 years, that's miraculous. You might be thinking, oh, that's so terrible and sad and tragic that it came back 6 years later. Yes, it is, but it could have been anywhere and everywhere. When I had gone to that PET scan, we had no idea what we were coming out of, and I could have lit up like a Christmas tree with the cancer going everywhere. I came out, and it was the one known area that was operable. That's huge. That, again, is completely serendipitous.
Now, this development, it did mean, though, that you had a second cancer battle ahead of you. And I'm thinking that mentally and emotionally, it put you at a bit of a crossroads. We've had guests who have survived one type of cancer only to be diagnosed with a completely different type of cancer. And they were at a crossroads. In other words, they could either say, I invested so much emotionally in surviving this first type of cancer, I don't have it in me to do this a second time. Or they can say, I survived this once, I can survive it again. Where did you find yourself at that time?
Good question. And again, I hope my story helps to inspire other people, because everybody's journey is different, and hopefully they can glean something from what I say or from what somebody else says. And so originally, when I had the cancer 6 years before that, when it originally showed up, again, I thought I was living a fairly healthy lifestyle. But if we backtrack just a little tiny bit to that, once I knew about the cancer diagnosis, once I had the mastectomy and the surgery and was involved in the healing process, I employed so many, like nearly all of the techniques that I had learned in The Truth About Cancer, in the research that I had done along the way. And so I had changed so many things about my lifestyle at that point. Thinking I was healthy before, I made huge changes after that. I honored sleep. I ate mindfully. I got sunshine. I did daily movement. I had a support system. I reduced stress. All of those things were super important to me. And so I did that all the way through for those 6 years. So hence, you can imagine how concerned and frustrated I was when this cancer had returned. And again, I had had it equally for 3 full years, not realizing that that's what it was. So when I realized what it was, and I'd had it all this time, and I'm doing all of this, like every day, I'm doing all of these things that I'm telling you about. I espouse those. I chat about them. I talk to people online. I have conversations with people. I'm an advocate for this. So I'm thinking, I'm the person that's advocating this healthful anti-living lifestyle. I post it to everybody. I make phone calls to people. And I'm the one with my cancer returning. Where does that put me in relationship to all of this? So what I felt like is, at first people might discount it and say, look, you did all those things and your cancer still came back. Okay, that was what I was concerned about. My message to people then and now is, I did all those things, and look, my cancer came back in one known area that was completely operable. Again, my cancer could have been, the cancer could have been everywhere. I feel like because I did those things, my cancer was contained as tight as possible. And it was sticking out like a big sore thumb. It was saying, come and take care of me. Here I am. Let's deal with this now before it gets all over the place. And so my message to people is that healthful living style kept it from traveling to places that would have been way more dangerous, and allowed me to realize where it was and to deal with it in a relatively good period of time, so that it didn't spread even further than it was. And so I continue with that message. I continue to push forward with it. Yeah, was it super challenging when it came back? It was, because I felt like I've done all these things all these years, and I'm the one that espouses it, and now my cancer came back. So yeah, there was a definite time of frustration, but it wasn't so overwhelming to me to realize I can do it again. I did this before. and I can do it again. And if I have to redouble my efforts, there's still things I didn't do the first time through that I could do this time. I've got a whole handful, a whole slew of things I can still employ if that needs to happen. And so that was my attitude. Right after surgery, yes, it was a low time. It was a low time right after surgery. That was emotionally very devastating to realize I've lost a bit of myself again. I've been through this already. Here I am back at square one. We're 6 years behind again. I was making progress and now I'm starting over. So there was a low time. Yeah, I went through a good 6 weeks of that and I'm okay with it. I think whenever you have a huge change in your life, having a new baby, going to school, moving to a new place, give yourself 6 weeks to get used to the situation. So I think the same thing with this. This is a whole new lifestyle for me to have to realize I'm 6 years back and I have to start over again. But at the same time, grab those things that I employed originally and utilize them and find them to be to my benefit. I double up on those efforts and I added a few more things that I know are going to help me.
Earlier, Brenda, we had talked about support that you got from friends and family, but those on a cancer journey can benefit from support groups. This is something that on our website podcast we have learned because we partner with a number of support groups. For you, a support group is very close to home. If you would, tell us where that support comes from. Tell us a little bit about that.
Good. I'd be super happy to. This is a passion of mine and has been for almost the whole time of the experience that I've been through. That's for sure. Right after I was diagnosed with the cancer, in the journey 6 years earlier, in my original time period of having my cancer diagnosis, right after that, my elder brother is a good support. I'm here in Arizona. I grew up in Oregon, and he still lives in Oregon. And he and I got together and ran one of these kind of muddy races, this warrior dash. And he got a whole lot of people from his work to do it with us. And my brother's really into making t-shirts. So any event you're going to be part of, he's got a t-shirt for it. So he made t-shirts and we all did this muddy race together and we called it Help Team Brenda. And we're pushing for Brenda and they were bright pink t-shirts and they had a donkey on them. We are kicking cancer in the donkey. That's what we say, kicking cancer in the donkey, and we're doing it for Brenda. And all these people joined this activity, this muddy race, to help support me through that journey. And that made a huge difference. Well, that was just like the very beginning. That was just a few people getting together. They didn't really know me, but I showed up there and we had this muddy race. And then afterward, my brother and I said, you know, if we keep it about Brenda, it's not really going to travel very far. Not many people know me. You're only going to get a few people who are supporters. That was great. We had like 50 people that were part of the group. That's fantastic. That starts it out. But in order to really keep this thing going and help espouse the comments that I had made, the healthy living comments, there's a lot of people that could use a support system that don't have it. And I had a little bit of a support system. Let's make it bigger. Let's make it so other people who are going through a really tough journey can have a support system also. So at that point, my brother and I co-founded a foundation of Kickin' Cancer. And we have a good foundation up there in Oregon. It's centered out of Salem, Oregon, where my brother lives. I travel up there several times a year and I speak at conferences and help people learn about anti-cancer living lifestyles. And I did this the whole time after my original cancer diagnosis and journey, not knowing at all that this was going to come back, that I was going to get the cancer back again and in the same location, a very unusual situation. And so I was able to springboard off of that to use to share with a lot of other people. So we do a foundation in Oregon where we can help support people. And I use that as my support too. It started out as Help Team Brenda, and we changed the name to Kickin' Cancer because we want to support everybody in their cancer journey, and everybody's journey is different. And so my point is, whatever you choose to do, I want to be there for you and help support you. And I want you to realize there are things that can help you along the way. We have 6 pillars that we use in our Kickin' Cancer Foundation, and we try to share those things and espouse on them. And we have a website and we have a Facebook page that people are welcome to look into. And I put up tips and ideas about anti-cancer living. And mostly we like to talk about those 6 pillars. pillars, one of them being that support system, honoring sleep, eating mindfully, getting rest, getting sunshine, getting a support system, and reducing stress. And all of those things will help with anything you're going through, whether it be cancer or something else in your life. But that's a big motivation for me. And I use that, to be honest, as my own support system in a wonderful, beautiful, selfish way that I need to be able to help with other people.
She is Brenda Farris of Yuma, Arizona. She has survived breast cancer once, and she is battling it a second time, and she's our guest. And Brenda, we are getting to the point now in which we're going to wrap things up. And when we conclude, we also do things pretty much the same way each time out. If you would, Brenda, imagine that you have encountered somebody in person or online. You have a private audience with someone who either has just been diagnosed with breast cancer, or more specifically, they're going through what you are going through now. They survived breast cancer once, but now they're battling it a second time. Your message to them, I suspect, would be multifaceted. But if you can pick one facet above all others, one point you really want to drive home with that person, what would it be?
Oh goodness, it's so hard to narrow it down. You're right. I want to be multifaceted, and there are a couple of things, and I'm trying to narrow it down to just one. And originally, I would say, you do have time. Like, do some research. You have a little bit of time because your cancer took a while to grow. It didn't grow right away, and we can get into that. But I'm going to say the bigger message I would share with someone, if I can only say one thing, here's what I would say: let cancer change you. A lot of people say, I'm going into cancer, but I'm going to be the same. I'm going to be the same person afterward. Don't worry. I won't change. I'll be the same. You know what? That cancer is there to teach you a lesson. It's there to be able to get the recipient to realize something's happening in their life that needs to be different. Let cancer change you. And the things that I changed in my life are huge, like the things that I already said. I honor sleep now. I mindfully eat. I get movement every day. Those things will make all the difference in your life. Something's happening in your life that is causing this cancer to be there. If you don't change something in your life, that cancer can continue to grow or it can come back. Let cancer change you for the good forever, and find out what those things are. And I espouse that anti-cancer living ideas. And that's why I try to share with people, let that change happen. And when it does, you will feel it through your whole body, not just through cancer. And it will be something that will make a huge difference for you. So let that cancer change you for the good and forever.
Excellent, Brenda. Thanks so much for sharing a story with us with so much energy and so much passion. And before we leave, you had referenced Kickin' Cancer having a website. What is that web address?
Yes, and it's a little bit different because normally it's Kickin' without a G, and then it's Kickin' Cancer. But because there's a lot of groups that like to grab onto that one, then it's actually Kicking, the whole word with a G, and then a hyphen, and then the word cancer.org. So it's kicking-cancer.org. We'd love to have you join us there. We have a support system that you can look into. We put up tips and tricks all the time, tips and ideas all the time. We have stories of survivors and those who may not have survived, but they have very inspirational stories to share. I put up ideas there all the time. We also have some items that you can purchase to help support your person, like t-shirts and beanies and things like that. And then we always have seminars that are coming up, and we'd love to have you share on them, listen to them, find out about them. You can ask questions. You can put your story up there, and we just feel like it's a great way for people to be supported. And the point is, originally we started with Help Team Brenda, and it was all about breast cancer, but it didn't take us long to realize there are so many other types of cancer out there. Our point is we want to support all cancer. So whatever your journey is, grab onto that. Look into our site, kicking-cancer.org, and we'd love to have you take a look at it.
Wonderful. Brenda, thanks so much for sharing. I have heard on your brother's weekly radio show him reference people unsolicited contacting him and letting him know how inspirational you've been. So I have no doubt that what you've shared with us today will be of inspiration to others. So on behalf of a bunch of people we don't know as of right now, thanks so much. Thanks for being with us on Cancer Interviews.
It was an excellent time. I'm so glad to share part of my story, and I do hope it helps somebody else. People, good luck with everything, and I'm happy to share what I can. It's been great, Bruce. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. And remember that if you are on a cancer journey, you are a loved one, you are not alone. There are plenty of people out there like Brenda, and her brother, Baron Robison in Salem, Oregon, who are there to provide help and insight that can ease your cancer journey. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.